The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Rows of people sat on the wooden benches, their eyes darting between the man in uniform and the woman standing calmly behind the judge's bench. It was supposed to be a routine hearing, just another day in court, but what was about to unfold would leave the entire room in shock. Officer Mark Taylor had a reputation. He was known in the small town for his short temper and the way he treated anyone who didn't look or live like him. Some whispered about it behind closed doors, others had seen it firsthand, but no one had ever dared to confront him. Not until today. Across from him stood Judge Danielle Carter, one of the youngest judges ever appointed in the state and, more importantly, the first black woman to hold the position in this county. Her record was spotless, her reputation for fairness unmatched, but Taylor didn't see any of that. To him, she was just another obstacle in his way, someone who refused to cover up the truth he was desperate to hide. The case on trial involved an incident that had already stirred tension in the community, a young man injured during a late-night arrest, allegedly by Taylor himself. Witnesses claimed excessive force, but the officer denied everything. Now, with evidence mounting and public attention fixed on the trial, Taylor felt the walls closing in. He stood at the witness stand, arms crossed, his jaw tight as Judge Carter read through the details. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was an undertone of resolve that made him bristle. She wasn't intimidated by his glare or the fact that half the local police force sat behind him, watching. And then it happened. As she questioned him about inconsistencies in his testimony, his temper snapped. "You don't talk to me like that," he hissed under his breath. She ignored the comment, asking again about the missing video footage from his body camera. Question hit a nerve. His face flushed red, his fists clenched on the stand, and in one reckless moment that no one in that room would ever forget, he lashed out. The sound of the slap cracked through the courtroom like lightning. Gasps filled the room, people jumped to their feet, and for a heartbeat time seemed to stop. Judge Carter stood frozen, her cheeks stinging, but her eyes locked on him with a calmness that was more powerful than any shouted words. What she said next, and what happened in the moments that followed, would not only end his career but change the course of this town forever. But in that instant, before anyone could react, one question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. What happens when justice itself is challenged in the very place meant to protect it? The room erupted into chaos, but Judge Carter didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hand slowly lowering from her cheek, eyes never leaving Officer Taylor's. For a second no one knew what to do. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whether to restrain the officer. Members of the jury looked stunned, some whispering to each other. Reporters seated in the back scrambled to capture every second, cameras clicking like rapid gunfire. Taylor, breathing hard, seemed to realize what he had just done, but pride wouldn't let him back down. "She provoked me," he muttered, his voice low but loud enough for those closest to hear. She had it coming. Those words sent another wave of shock through the room. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Cold, defiant, as if he believed he could get away with anything. Judge Carter didn't respond immediately. She knew one wrong word could ignite something far bigger than this courtroom. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the case, the young man whose life had been shattered, and the community outside these walls watching closely. For weeks, the town had been simmering. People were divided. Some stood firmly behind Taylor, calling him a hero who kept the streets safe. Others demanded accountability, pointing to a history of complaints against him that had quietly disappeared from official records. Now, with this very public display, those hidden truths were threatening to surface. The case itself had layers most didn't see. The victim, Marcus Hill, was a 22-year-old college student with no criminal record. He had been pulled over for a broken taillight late one night. Minutes later, he was in the hospital with a fractured jaw and bruised ribs. Taylor claimed Marcus resisted arrest. Marcus claimed he begged for help while being beaten. Body camera footage could have cleared it up, except the footage from that night was missing. Judge Carter had reviewed the files, the witness statements, and the timeline. Something didn't add up, and Taylor knew she was getting close to exposing it. That was why he had lost control. She finally spoke, her voice steady. "Officer Taylor, you will step back immediately." The bailiff moved forward, but Taylor didn't budge. His eyes flickered toward the back of the courtroom where two men in plain clothes sat. They gave him the slightest nod, so small most would have missed it. Carter caught it. Her stomach tightened. There was more to this than just one angry officer. As security finally stepped in, escorting Taylor out, whispers rippled through the courtroom. Some people looked relieved. Others looked worried. And Judge Carter, standing alone at the bench, felt a chill she couldn't quite explain. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And deep down, she knew the real fight wasn't about what had just happened in this room. It was about what powerful people outside of it were willing to do to make sure the truth never came to light. The courthouse hallways buzzed with noise as Officer Taylor was led away. Cameras followed him, reporters shouting questions he ignored. Inside the judge's chambers, Judge Carter sat alone for a moment, her hands resting on the edge of her desk. She wasn't shaken by the slap itself. She had faced worse in her career, but what unsettled her was the look in his eyes, that silent signal exchanged with the men in the back row. It meant he wasn't acting alone. She reached for her phone and dialed Assistant District Attorney Michael Reyes. He had been working on the Marcus Hill case alongside her and understood how delicate it was. "Michael," she said, her voice low, "we have a bigger problem. Taylor's reaction today wasn't just about pressure. Someone's backing him. And they're here, watching us." There was a pause on the other end. "I was afraid of that," Michael admitted. "I've been digging through old complaints. Every single one linked to Taylor was signed off by the same internal affairs officer. Guess who's his brother-in-law?" Carter closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly what she feared. A network protecting him from inside. "We can't let this go," she said firmly. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, a different story was spreading. News outlets ran with headlines like, "Courtroom Chaos," "Officer Strikes Judge," and social media exploded with videos of the moment. The town was split even deeper now. Protests began forming in front of the courthouse, some demanding justice for Marcus Hill, others holding signs supporting Taylor. At Marcus's family home, his mother watched the news coverage with trembling hands. "They'll try to bury this," she whispered to Marcus, who sat quietly on the couch, his jaw still bandaged. He hadn't wanted to come forward, but after seeing the officer attack the judge on live TV, something in him shifted. "I'm not staying quiet anymore," he said softly. Back at the police station, Taylor sat in a small office with the two men from the courtroom. One of them, Captain Harris, leaned forward. "You let your temper get the better of you," he said sharply. "Do you have any idea what kind of mess this creates for us?" Taylor scowled. She was pushing too hard. "She knows something." Harris exchanged a glance with the other man, then said, "Then we make sure she doesn't find anything else." That night, as Judge Carter drove home, she noticed a black SUV in her rearview mirror. It followed her through 3 turns before finally disappearing. When she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. The fight for justice had just become far more dangerous, and she was now a target. Rain pelted against the windshield as Judge Carter drove to the courthouse the next morning. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, that message flashed in her mind. She had considered calling in extra security but decided against it. If she showed fear, they would know they were getting to her. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was different. Heavier. The hallways were lined with officers from Taylor's department, their expressions unreadable. She could feel eyes on her as she walked past, a silent warning in every glance. Michael met her outside her chambers. He looked exhausted, his tie slightly askew. "We got something," he whispered. "A clerk slipped me a copy of a report last night." Internal Affairs marked Taylor's body cam as malfunctioning, but the timestamp shows it was manually disabled. There's more payments, unaccounted overtime. This goes beyond him. Carter's heart quickened. How strong is it? Strong enough to take down more than just Taylor, he replied. But if they know we have this, they'll do whatever it takes to stop us. They both knew what that meant. In the courtroom, the gallery was packed. Protesters outside shouted so loudly that their chants echoed faintly through the walls. Reporters filled every seat, ready for another spectacle. Taylor entered flanked by attorneys and supporters. He looked confident again, almost smug, as though last night's events had never happened. Judge Carter took her seat. As proceedings began, Michael rose to present the new evidence. He held up the documents, explaining how the body cam had been deliberately disabled. Murmurs rippled through the room. Taylor's jaw tightened. Then suddenly the lights flickered. Once, and went out. Gasps filled the courtroom. In the darkness, someone shouted. A loud bang echoed from the hallway outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. Emergency lights blinked on seconds later, bathing the room in dim red glow. Carter scanned the room. Taylor was still seated, but his attorneys looked shaken. Michael leaned closer to her. "They're trying to rattle us," he whispered. A bailiff rushed in, pale-faced. "Judge, you need to see this," he said urgently, handing her a phone. On the screen was a live feed from the courthouse parking lot, a black SUV idling near her car. The license plate was covered. She handed the phone back, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. "Proceed," she ordered. But as Michael resumed, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. The two men from the previous day, the ones who had nodded at Taylor, were trying to leave, pushing past security. One of them dropped a folder. Paper spilled across the floor, and for a moment, everything stopped as Carter saw what was inside. Photos of her home, her family, and Marcus Hill's hospital room. The tension was unbearable now, every second stretching longer than the last. She knew this wasn't just about a case anymore. It was a battle for truth, and the people trying to silence it were closing in fast. Judge Carter stared at the photographs scattered across the floor, her breath catching in her throat. The room buzzed with confusion, but she forced herself to stay composed. She couldn't let anyone see how deeply this rattled her. "Secure those papers," she instructed firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The bailiff gathered them quickly, locking them in an evidence bag. Michael leaned in close. "They're escalating. This isn't intimidation anymore. They're threatening everyone connected to this case." Before she could respond, her phone vibrated on the bench. Another message from the unknown number. "Last warning. Walk away, or they won't be the only ones hurt." Attached was a photo taken just minutes ago. Marcus Hill leaving his home, unaware someone was watching him. Carter felt a cold wave wash over her. She glanced toward the gallery, scanning faces, searching for any sign of who might be behind this. Then she saw him, a man she didn't recognize, sitting alone in the last row. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching Marcus's mother, who sat quietly near the front, unaware of his stare. He turned to Michael. "Get Marcus here. And get his family under protection." As court recessed for a brief break, Carter retreated to her chambers with Michael. He shut the door behind them and immediately pulled out a flash drive. "There's something else," he said, plugging it into her laptop. "A contact of mine in IT pulled this from the courthouse security system. Look." On the screen appeared a video from 2 nights ago. It showed Officer Taylor entering the courthouse after hours, escorted by Captain Harris and another officer. They were carrying a box, evidence from the Marcus Hill case. The timestamp proved it was the night before key files mysteriously vanished from the court's archive. "This is it," Michael said. "Proof of a cover-up." But before they could say more, a loud crash erupted from the hallway outside. Shouts followed, then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Carter's heart pounded as she and Michael froze, exchanging one terrified glance. The door burst open, and the bailiff stumbled in, breathless. They're here. Someone just attacked the security office. They're trying to wipe the servers. Everything clicked in Carter's mind at once. They weren't just trying to intimidate her. They were erasing every piece of evidence that could bring them down. If they succeeded, Marcus's case would be dead, and the truth would vanish forever. She grabbed the flash drive, tucking it into her jacket. "We can't stay here," she said. "They know we have this." In the distance, the fire alarm began blaring, and smoke started seeping under the chamber door. Someone had triggered a fire as a distraction. Carter looked at Michael, resolve hardening in her eyes. "They're coming for us," she whispered. "And they're not leaving witnesses." Smoke thickened in the hallway as Judge Carter and Michael moved quickly toward a side exit. The courthouse was in chaos, alarms blaring, people running in every direction. Michael clutched the flash drive like his life depended on it, and maybe it did. As they reached the stairwell, footsteps pounded behind them. Carter glanced back to see two men in plain clothes, the same ones from the courtroom, closing in fast. "Go!" she hissed to Michael as they raced down the steps. Bursting through the lower-level door, they found themselves in the dimly lit parking garage. The black SUV was still there, engine running. A figure stepped out, Captain Harris. "You should have stayed quiet, Judge," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "Now you've forced our hand." Michael stepped forward. "This ends today, Harris. We have everything. The payments, the missing footage, the proof you've been covering for Taylor and others like him." Harris smirked. "Proof doesn't matter if no one lives to present it." Before he could move, a loud command rang out. "Drop your weapon." Dozens of armed federal agents swarmed the garage, red and blue lights flooding the concrete walls. Harris froze as FBI jackets appeared from every corner. The plainclothes men were quickly tackled to the ground. Carter stared in shock as Special Agent Lewis approached. "Judge Carter," he said, "we've been monitoring this operation for months. Your persistence gave us the evidence we needed to move in today." Relief washed over her, but only for a moment. Across the garage, Officer Taylor emerged from the shadows, gun in hand. "You think this is over?" he shouted, aiming straight at Carter. Time slowed. Michael moved instinctively, stepping in front of her just as a single shot rang out, but it wasn't from Taylor. He collapsed to the ground as an FBI agent fired, disarming him instantly. Taylor lay on the floor, handcuffed within seconds. His furious eyes locked on Carter. Outside, the chaos quieted. Protesters who had gathered around the courthouse watched as Taylor, Harris, and the others were led away in custody. The truth would finally come out. Every hidden report, every covered-up complaint. Marcus Hill's case would not be buried. As Carter stood on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing all around her, Michael handed her the flash drive. "We did it," he said with a tired smile. But before she could reply, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She hesitated, then opened the message. "You took down a few pawns. The real players are still out there. We'll be seeing you soon." She looked up at the crowd, her victory bittersweet. The battle in this town was over, but the war for justice had just begun. The following weeks brought a wave of change to the small town. The arrests of Officer Taylor, Captain Harris, and several others in the department sent shockwaves through the community. Federal investigators uncovered years of corruption, altered reports, missing evidence, and a network of people who had protected each other at the expense of justice. For many, it was painful to learn how deep the wrongdoing went, but for others, it was the first sign of hope in a long time. Judge Carter sat in her office one late evening, reviewing the final reports. Marcus Hill's case had officially concluded. Taylor was found guilty of excessive force, obstruction, and perjury. Marcus's testimony, once doubted by many, had become the turning point in court. His quiet strength in the face of fear inspired others to come forward with their own stories, creating a chain reaction that could no longer be silenced. She thought about Marcus's mother, who had hugged her tightly after the verdict, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't just fight for my son," she had whispered. "You fought for all of us." Those words stayed with Carter, a reminder of why she had chosen this path in the first place. Michael entered the office, dropping a small stack of papers on her desk. The Department of Justice is setting up an oversight committee for the county. Things won't change overnight, but this is a start, he said with a faint smile. Carter nodded. It's more than a start. It's a promise. Outside, the courthouse grounds were quieter now. The protests had faded, replaced by community meetings and open forums where people could finally speak without fear. The town was healing slowly but surely. Yet, the message she had received on the day of the arrests lingered in her mind. The real players are still out there. She knew it wasn't an empty threat. Change had begun here, but corruption didn't end with one case. It was something that had to be fought over and over again. As she packed up for the night, she looked at the framed photograph on her desk, her family smiling on a sunny afternoon. She realized that every fight for justice carried a cost, but it was worth paying if it meant leaving a better world for them. Walking out of the courthouse, the evening air felt different, lighter. She paused at the steps, looking out at the town she had nearly lost faith in. There would be other battles ahead, but this one had proven something important, that even in the face of intimidation, truth can prevail, and one act of courage can ignite change. Judge Danielle Carter walked into the night with a quiet resolve. She didn't need recognition or headlines. She only needed to keep going, to keep standing up for what was right. Because justice, she knew, wasn't just a verdict. It was a promise kept alive by those who refused to let it die. And she intended to keep that promise, no matter what came next.